My rich-in-laws laughed at my $20 dress. They didn't know I owned the company hosting the gala. The first thing my mother-in-law noticed wasn't my smile. It wasn't the invitation in my hand. It wasn't the fact that I had been personally welcomed at the entrance. It was my dress. She looked me up and down, smiled just enough to stay polite, then quietly told the women standing beside her that I must have bought it from a discount rack. One of my sisters-in-law laughed. Another asked if money had become so tight that I couldn't even afford a proper evening gown. I didn't defend myself. I simply thanked the valet, adjusted my bracelet, and walked beside them toward the ballroom. Because I knew something they didn't. The gala wasn't theirs. It wasn't organized by my husband's wealthy family. It wasn't hosted by one of their billionaire friends. The company whose logo was displayed on every banner, the company every guest had come to celebrate, belonged to me. And before the night was over, the people laughing at my $20 dress would discover why I had chosen to wear it. My name is Olivia. I'm 34 years old. If you asked my husband's family to describe me, they would probably use the same word every time. Ordinary. Not because I lacked ambition, not because I wasn't educated, but because I never looked rich. I drove my car until it stopped working. I bought clothes because they were comfortable, not because they carried designer labels. I preferred bookstores over luxury boutiques. I'd rather spend money expanding my business than proving to strangers I could afford expensive handbags. My husband, Ethan, loved that about me. His family hated it. Ethan grew up surrounded by old money. His grandfather had built a successful real estate empire decades earlier. His parents inherited millions. His older brother managed investment properties. His younger sister documented luxury vacations for hundreds of thousands of followers online. Their lives revolved around appearances. Every dinner became a silent competition. Who wore the most expensive watch? Who drove the newest car? Who booked the most exclusive resort? Then Ethan married me. I came from a middle-class family. My father taught high school history. My mother worked at the public library. I paid my own tuition, worked through college, started my first business from a tiny apartment using a folding table as a desk. To Ethan, that determination was attractive. To his parents, it was embarrassing. The first time I attended one of their family dinners, my father-in-law asked where I worked. I proudly explained that I owned a small technology company. Instead of asking what we built, he asked how many employees I had. When I answered 12, he smiled politely, then said, "Everyone starts somewhere." The conversation immediately shifted back to Ethan's brother discussing commercial property investments worth tens of millions of dollars. Nobody asked another question about my company. At first, I assumed they simply weren't interested in technology. I eventually realized the truth. They had already decided my business couldn't possibly matter. Not compared to real estate, not compared to inherited wealth. So I stopped trying to impress them. Oddly enough, that seemed to irritate them even more. Every holiday brought another subtle insult. If I brought homemade desserts, my mother-in-law joked that successful women usually hired caterers. If Ethan and I flew economy on short domestic flights, his sister asked whether business had been slow lately. When I wore the same handbag twice in 1 month, someone inevitably noticed. Everything became evidence that I didn't belong in their world. The funny part was, I could have afforded everything they were showing off. I simply didn't care. While they spent hundreds of thousands decorating vacation homes, I reinvested nearly every dollar back into my company. While they collected luxury watches, I collected patents. While they chased status, I chased growth. Nobody in Ethan's family knew exactly how large my company had become. Not because it was a secret, because none of them had ever asked. 3 years earlier, we had developed a workplace software platform that quietly exploded across corporate America. 1 client became 10, 10 became hundreds. Within 5 years, we had offices in 4 cities, more than 400 employees, international investors, industry awards, revenue I never imagined when I started. Yet every family gathering remained exactly the same. I was still the girl with the little business. Eventually, I stopped correcting them. Then, one Monday morning, my executive assistant walked into my office with exciting news. Our company had officially been selected to host one of the largest charity galas in the city. More than 800 guests, Fortune 500 executives, political leaders, major investors, the mayor, national media. It would be the biggest event our company had ever organized. As CEO, I would deliver the closing speech. A week later, Ethan mentioned something interesting over dinner. His parents had also received invitations. His father sounded unusually excited. Apparently, attending our gala had become one of the year's biggest status symbols. I almost laughed. They had no idea whose invitation they had accepted. I asked Ethan whether they knew my company was hosting. He looked surprised, then admitted they probably hadn't paid attention to the organizer's name. They simply accepted because everyone important would be there. I smiled. For the first time in years, I decided not to tell them. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted to see how they treated me when they believed I had nothing they wanted. The gala was still 3 weeks away. My executive team treated it like the most important event in the company's history. Every department had deadlines. Marketing finalized media partnerships. Operations coordinated with the hotel. Security reviewed guest lists. Our design team spent days perfecting every banner, every table arrangement, every lighting detail. Meanwhile, I was focused on something much smaller: my dress. My assistant assumed I would order a custom designer gown. She even sent me a list of famous fashion houses. I thanked her, then politely declined. Instead, I spent an afternoon browsing a small neighborhood boutique that was closing its doors. Near the back of the store, I found a simple navy blue evening dress. Elegant, classic, no visible logo. It fit perfectly. The price tag read $20. The owner apologized for the low price. She explained everything had to be sold before the lease ended. I smiled, paid in cash, and wished her luck. When I brought the dress home, Ethan laughed. Not because he disliked it, because he knew exactly what his family would say. He looked at the price tag and shook his head. "My mother is going to lose her mind." I laughed with him. "Good." He studied me for a moment, then asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Why won't you just tell them?" I thought about it carefully before answering. "Because if they only respect me after they learn I'm wealthy, I'll know they never respected me at all." Ethan nodded. He understood. One reason our marriage worked so well was because he had stopped trying to change his parents years ago. He loved them, but he no longer expected them to become different people. The week before the gala, my mother-in-law invited everyone to brunch. As usual, conversation revolved around money. My brother-in-law proudly announced he had purchased another vacation home. His wife showed everyone photographs of an imported Italian dining table that cost more than my first apartment. Then my sister-in-law held up her phone. She had just ordered a custom-made evening gown for the gala. $38,000. She proudly announced the designer had created only 3 dresses in that color worldwide. Everyone admired the photos. Then all eyes turned toward me. My mother-in-law smiled sweetly. She asked whether I had found something appropriate to wear. I answered honestly, "I already have." She asked which designer. I simply said I found something I liked. That answer clearly disappointed her. She continued asking questions. Was it custom-made? Imported? Limited edition? I quietly shook my head. Finally, she laughed, then said she hoped I wouldn't embarrass Ethan by dressing too casually at such an important event. Several people around the table smiled. No one defended me, not even my father-in-law. He merely sipped his coffee as if the conversation were completely normal. I changed the subject. The following Friday, our executive board held the final planning meeting. Every detail had been rehearsed. At the very end, our event director asked one last question. "Would you like to be announced when you arrive?" I immediately answered no. The room looked confused. Most CEOs loved grand entrances. I didn't. I explained that I'd arrive quietly with the regular guests. The master of ceremonies would introduce me only after dinner, just before the keynote address. No one outside the executive team needed to know I was already inside the ballroom. The event director smiled. He said surprises often made the best memories. I had no idea how true those words would become. The night of the gala finally arrived. Luxury cars lined the entrance of the 5-star hotel. Television cameras waited outside. Photographers stood behind velvet ropes. Inside, hundreds of guests filled the marble lobby. Ethan and I arrived exactly on time. Almost immediately, we spotted his family. My mother-in-law was wearing a diamond necklace large enough to catch the light from across the room. My sister-in-law posed for photographs before she had even checked in. My father-in-law spent several minutes making sure everyone noticed his new Swiss watch. Then they saw me. My mother-in-law looked down at my dress, then back up at my face. She smiled, not kindly, the kind of smile someone gives when they've just found proof they were right all along. She quietly asked where I bought it. I answered truthfully. A small boutique. She nodded slowly, then asked how much it cost. I could have lied. Instead, I smiled. $20. For a moment, no one said anything. Then my sister-in-law burst into laughter. Within seconds, my brother-in-law joined in. Even two of their family friends exchanged amused looks. My mother-in-law leaned toward one of the women standing beside her. She didn't whisper quite quietly enough. She said she had spent more than $20 on the ribbon wrapped around her evening gift. The group laughed again. Several nearby guests turned to look. I simply adjusted my bracelet, smiled politely, and walked toward the ballroom. None of them noticed that the hotel's general manager had just left the front desk and was walking directly toward me with a very different expression on his face. The hotel manager walked directly toward me the moment I entered the lobby. Instead of greeting the guests surrounding me, he came straight to my side with the respect usually reserved for major sponsors and executives. He briefly confirmed that every arrangement for the evening had been completed exactly as requested. I thanked him and told him I would join the other guests before heading backstage later. He nodded immediately and left. My mother-in-law noticed the interaction but dismissed it almost instantly. She assumed the hotel manager had simply mistaken me for someone else. No one in the family questioned it any further. Inside, the ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Fresh floral arrangements filled every corner. Large LED screens displayed the logo of the company hosting the gala behind the stage. Ironically, my husband's family admired the decorations without realizing they were looking at the branding of my own company. They were far more interested in greeting wealthy acquaintances and showing off their expensive clothing and jewelry. My father-in-law eagerly introduced himself to several investors. My sister-in-law spent nearly 20 minutes posing for photographs in front of the sponsor wall, carefully making sure the company's logo appeared behind every picture she posted online. She had no idea she was proudly advertising my business. Dinner began shortly afterward. The ballroom buzzed with conversations between entrepreneurs, executives, politicians, investors, and journalists. Throughout the evening, several members of my executive team quietly passed by our table. Each acknowledged me with a respectful smile or subtle nod before continuing on with their responsibilities. None of them stopped to speak. That had been planned in advance. I wanted the evening to unfold naturally. My mother-in-law eventually noticed how many influential people seemed to recognize me. Rather than becoming suspicious, she convinced herself they simply confused me with another guest. The explanation suited the version of reality she had believed for years. As the evening progressed, more senior executives from my company appeared throughout the ballroom. Each one acknowledged me with the same quiet professionalism. My father-in-law watched the interactions with growing curiosity, but he assumed I had crossed paths with them through Ethan or some unrelated business connection. The possibility that I might actually be leading the organization hosting the event never entered his mind. Eventually, the lights dimmed. Conversations faded. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and welcomed more than 800 distinguished guests to one of the city's most prestigious charity galas. The audience applauded as sponsors, community leaders, and distinguished guests were recognized. My husband's family listened attentively, eager to see the powerful executive responsible for organizing such an exclusive evening. They imagined someone dressed in a custom designer gown, surrounded by assistants and security. Someone who looked exactly the way they believed success should look. The introduction built anticipation throughout the ballroom. The audience learned that the founder of the hosting company had transformed a small startup into one of the fastest-growing businesses in the industry, creating hundreds of jobs and earning national recognition in only a few years. Everyone instinctively began scanning the room. They searched for an unfamiliar face among the VIP tables. No one thought to look at me. Then, a spotlight slowly moved across the ballroom. It passed dozens of tables before stopping directly where I was sitting. For a brief moment, nobody understood what was happening. Hundreds of guests turned toward the illuminated table. My mother-in-law looked around in confusion. My father-in-law searched behind him, convinced the spotlight had landed in the wrong place. My sister-in-law smiled awkwardly, assuming the hotel staff had made an embarrassing mistake. Then, several senior executives from the company approached my table, not as guests, as members of the leadership team. They respectfully waited beside me while the audience applauded. Only then did the truth finally begin to settle over my husband's family. The woman they had mocked for wearing a $20 dress, the woman they had spent years treating as though she didn't belong among successful people, was the founder, the chief executive, and the owner of the company hosting the most important gala of the year. For several long seconds, the ballroom was completely silent. Even the photographers stopped taking pictures. The applause that had begun moments earlier faded into stunned disbelief as hundreds of guests realized the woman standing beneath the spotlight had been sitting quietly among them all evening. I stood from my chair. I straightened the same $20 dress that had been mocked less than an hour earlier. Then I calmly made my way toward the stage. Every step seemed slower than the last, not because I was nervous, because I could feel my husband's family watching me. None of them moved. My mother-in-law remained frozen in her chair. Her confident smile had disappeared. My father-in-law stared at the large screens behind the stage, where my company's logo slowly transitioned into a presentation introducing its founder. My name appeared beneath the photographs. So did the company's history. The audience learned that the business had started from a one-bedroom apartment with less than $5,000 in savings. They learned that it had grown into an international technology company employing hundreds of people. They learned that the company had received multiple innovation awards and had recently expanded into 3 new countries. Every achievement appeared on the screen for the entire ballroom to see. My husband's family watched each slide in complete silence. For years, they had dismissed my work as a tiny online business. Now they were discovering that while they had been laughing at me, I had quietly built one of the fastest-growing companies in the industry. I reached the stage and thanked the audience for supporting the charity gala. Then I spoke about something far more important than business. I spoke about perseverance, about the early mornings when success felt impossible, about years of rejection, about choosing long-term purpose over short-term appearances. I explained that many people judge success by what they can immediately see: luxury cars, designer clothing, expensive jewelry, large houses. But real success is usually invisible for a very long time. It is built in empty offices after everyone else has gone home. It grows through failure, discipline, and patience. The audience responded with warm applause. Many nodded as they listened. Several business owners smiled because they recognized the journey. When the presentation ended, I announced that every dollar raised during the evening would fund scholarships for young entrepreneurs who lacked financial opportunities. That announcement received the loudest applause of the night. As I stepped away from the podium, dozens of executives approached to congratulate me. Investors requested meetings. Journalists asked for interviews. Business leaders introduced themselves. For nearly 40 minutes, I barely had a moment alone. Across the ballroom, my husband's family remained seated. For the first time since I had known them, no one was paying attention to their designer suits. No one admired their jewelry. No one cared which luxury car they had driven to the hotel. Every conversation in the room centered on the woman they had dismissed because of a $20 dress. Eventually, my mother-in-law walked toward me. Gone was the amused expression she had worn at the entrance. She now smiled with a warmth I had never seen before. She congratulated me repeatedly. She praised my intelligence, my determination, my business success. She even claimed she had always believed I would accomplish great things. I listened quietly. Her words sounded kind, but they arrived years too late. Because I remembered every family dinner, every sarcastic smile, every comment disguised as concern. Every moment she had measured my worth by the price tag on my clothes instead of the character behind them. Nothing had changed except one thing. She finally knew how much money I had, and that was exactly the problem. For the first time, she wasn't respecting me. She was respecting my success. Those are 2 very different things. I didn't argue. I didn't remind her of everything she had said over the years. I simply thanked her for the congratulations. Then I turned my attention back to the guests waiting to speak with me. That hurt her more than any clever comeback ever could. For years, she had controlled every conversation. Now, she was the one waiting for my attention. The rest of the evening became a blur. One after another, business leaders introduced themselves. Several CEOs asked about future partnerships. A venture capital firm requested a private meeting the following week. The mayor personally thanked me for supporting local education through the scholarship fund. Photographers asked me to stand in front of the company logo for official photographs. Television reporters requested short interviews. Everywhere I turned, someone wanted a few minutes of my time. Meanwhile, my husband's family had quietly become invisible. The same people who usually dominated every social event now stood alone near their table, watching the room revolve around someone they had spent years underestimating. I noticed my sister-in-law checking her phone repeatedly. Earlier that evening, she had proudly uploaded photographs of her designer gown. Now, every social media post from the gala featured me standing on stage. The headlines weren't discussing luxury fashion. They were discussing the young entrepreneur who had donated millions to expand educational opportunities. For once, her expensive dress wasn't the center of attention. Later that evening, one of my board members approached with a small velvet box. It contained the company's annual leadership award. Every year, it was presented to someone whose decisions had made the greatest impact on both the company and the community. This year, the board had secretly chosen me. As I accepted the award, the audience rose to their feet. The standing ovation lasted nearly a full minute. I looked across the ballroom. Ethan was smiling, not because of the applause, because he remembered where everything had started. A tiny apartment, a folding table, late nights, rejected proposals, months when paying rent felt impossible. He had been there before there were awards, before investors, before anyone believed my company would survive. That meant more than every round of applause combined. As the evening came to an end, guests slowly began leaving the ballroom. Near the entrance, I saw my father-in-law waiting. Unlike my mother-in-law, he wasn't smiling. He looked thoughtful, older somehow. After several moments, he quietly admitted that he had judged me from the very beginning. He believed wealth was something people displayed. He never imagined someone truly successful would choose such a simple life. He confessed something that surprised me. When he first met me, he assumed I would eventually depend on Ethan financially. Instead, I had built something larger than anything he had ever created himself. There was no jealousy in his voice, only regret. I appreciated his honesty, but honesty could not erase years of disrespect. I wished him a good evening and walked toward the exit. Outside, the cool night air felt refreshing after hours inside the ballroom. As Ethan and I waited for the valet, he looked at my dress and laughed softly. Not at me. With me. It still looked exactly the same. No diamonds, no famous designer label, no luxury brand, just a simple $20 dress. Nothing about it had changed. The only thing that had changed was what people believed it represented, and that realization stayed with me all the way home. The drive home was quiet, not uncomfortable, just quiet. Neither Ethan nor I felt the need to replay everything that had happened. The evening had spoken for itself. When we pulled into our driveway, I slipped off my heels and carried them inside. The $20 dress was still hanging perfectly. No one looking at it would guess it had just been worn on one of the biggest stages in the city. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. News articles, business magazines, television interviews, photos from the gala had spread everywhere. Most headlines focused on the scholarship program our company had announced. Others highlighted our rapid growth over the past decade. But one article caught my attention. It wasn't about me. It was about the dress. A fashion blogger had discovered where it came from. The tiny boutique owner I had bought it from was suddenly receiving thousands of online orders. People loved the story. Not because the dress was expensive, because it proved elegance had nothing to do with price. By lunchtime, the boutique had sold out of almost every item. The owner called me in tears. She said she had been preparing to close the business forever. Now she was hiring new employees instead. Hearing that made me happier than any compliment I had received the night before. A week later, our company held its monthly executive meeting. At the very end, my assistant entered with an unexpected visitor. It was the owner of that little boutique. She carried a carefully wrapped gift box. Inside was another evening dress, simple, beautiful, handmade. She explained she wanted to thank me for saving her business. I smiled and told her she had saved it herself. People simply needed a reason to notice her work. As she left, my marketing director laughed. He joked that the $20 dress had generated more positive publicity than some companies achieved with million-dollar advertising campaigns. He wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, life became very different for my husband's family. Relatives who had ignored my business for years suddenly wanted advice. Some asked if I could mentor their children. Others wanted internships. A few even asked whether I had investment opportunities available. I politely declined most of the requests, not out of revenge, because business decisions couldn't be based on family guilt. Then one Sunday, my mother-in-law invited Ethan and me to dinner. The atmosphere felt strangely unfamiliar. For the first time since I had known her, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. No designer handbags were displayed across the dining room, no discussion about luxury vacations, no comparisons between relatives. Instead, she quietly served dinner herself. She seemed almost nervous. Halfway through the meal, she admitted something she had never said before. She confessed that she had spent most of her life believing expensive things proved someone's value. Her friends competed over houses, jewelry, cars. She simply continued playing the same game without ever questioning whether it made sense. Then she looked at me. She admitted that the $20 dress embarrassed her because she thought it reflected poorly on the family. Instead, it exposed something much worse. It exposed how quickly she judged people based on appearances. She apologized, not because I was successful, but because she finally understood why she had been wrong. This time, I believed her. Not because of her words, because of what happened afterward. Over the following months, she changed. She stopped making comments about clothing, stopped comparing salaries, stopped asking relatives how much they spent on vacations. For the first time, family dinners felt like family dinners, not competitions. One afternoon, nearly a year after the gala, our scholarship foundation held its first graduation ceremony. More than 50 young entrepreneurs received funding to launch businesses they never could have afforded on their own. Some came from wealthy families, some had almost nothing. None of that mattered. As I stood on stage looking across the audience, I noticed my mother-in-law sitting beside Ethan. She wasn't looking at the students' clothes, or their watches, or their handbags. She was listening to their dreams, and somehow, that felt like the greatest success of all. Looking back, people often ask whether wearing that $20 dress was part of some elaborate plan. The truth is much simpler. I wore it because I liked it. Everything else happened because other people believed a price tag could measure a person's worth. It can't. Luxury can buy attention, it can buy admiration, sometimes it can even buy influence, but it will never buy character. The people who laughed at my $20 dress thought they were judging my value. In reality, they were revealing their own. Thank you for listening to Reddit Stories. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional Reddit stories filled with family drama, betrayal, satisfying karma, and unforgettable endings. And tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated because of the way you looked? What happened when people finally learned the truth?